Deep inside an isolated forest sits a dilapidated house. It has been completely vacant for 3 years, left to decay along an unpaved road. The property carries a grim history. It was the site of a brutal triple homicide involving a mother and her 2 young daughters, a case that remains unsolved to this day. Physically, the house is a shell. It is entirely disconnected from the power grid, devoid of electricity, and possesses no functioning means of communication. Yet at exactly 1 a.m. on a quiet night, a man's voice placed a call to a local pizza shop from this address. This creates an impossible collision of facts. A verified cold case site, abandoned and unpowered for years, suddenly produced a mundane dispatch call. The physical laws of the property and the digital record of the call cannot both be true. John, a college student, working the grueling closing shift at a nearby pizza shop, was the one who answered that call. The order was for 4 large pizzas. For a student struggling with expenses, the promise of a high tip outweighed the strangeness of the request. Despite the late hour and the isolated location, John silenced his internal red flags. He focused on the financial gain, rationalizing the risks as he packed the order. Financial necessity often functions as a blinder. John's need for the tip forced him to overlook the obvious dangers of the delivery, leading him to drive willingly toward the forest. John's journey took him miles away from the city lights, navigating a pitch-black dirt road that grew narrower as he approached the coordinates. He arrived to find the house exactly as the records described: dark, silent, and heavily overgrown with wild vegetation. Unease set in immediately. John pulled out his phone to call his manager and abort the delivery, but the call went unanswered. He was officially on his own. He faced a specific professional constraint. Returning with the pizzas without authorization meant the cost would be deducted from his own paycheck. The rigid rules of his employment acted as the final snare. John stepped out of his vehicle and approached the porch, because the cost of turning back was a penalty he couldn't afford. As John reached the porch, a single dim light flickered on deep inside the house, providing a false sign of occupancy in a building with no power. He rang the bell, and the heavy front door creaked open entirely on its own. It revealed a hallway swallowed by shadows. John stepped inside, calling out for the customer. He stood in the empty hallway, holding the pizzas and waiting for a response that didn't come. Suddenly, the house came alive. A cat darted past his legs, a television blared to life in the next room, and the sound of children laughing echoed through the halls. These elements, the pet, the TV, and the laughter, mimicked the environment of a normal home. John moved toward the sounds, venturing deeper into the interior and further away from the front door. In the living room, John found 2 young girls sitting in the dark. They were perfectly still, their eyes fixed on him with an unnatural intensity. Frustrated by their silence, John demanded to speak with an adult so he could collect the payment and leave. The girls remained silent, but their eyes rolled back until only the whites were visible. Their expressions twisted as a jagged laugh filled the room. Together, they raised their hands and pointed at the space directly behind John's shoulder. John turned and found himself inches away from the towering, horrific apparition of the mother. Total panic took over. John dropped the pizzas and ran for the exit, sprinting back toward his motorcycle. He attempted to start the bike, but the engine sputtered and died. A sudden puncture had flattened his rear tire, pinning him to the spot. He looked into his rearview mirror. Standing in the mist behind him were the 3 figures, slowly advancing through the darkness of the driveway. John abandoned the motorcycle and fled into the woods. He hid in the dense brush for hours, remaining motionless until the arrival of police sirens finally broke the silence. The encounter had evolved into an active, aggressive pursuit. The entities had physically moved to intercept John, trapping him on the property and forcing him into the forest. The police conducted a full sweep of the house, entering with weapons drawn to find the people John had described. They found nothing. The house was filled with thick dust and shadows. The only living thing inside was a single wildcat. The next morning, John learned the details of the murders that occurred there 3 years ago. The victims, a mother and 2 young daughters, perfectly matched the 3 figures he had encountered. He had spent the night with the occupants of a 3-year-old cold case. This suggests the house functions as a temporal loop. The family remains trapped in the structure, perpetually reliving the trauma of their final night. The trauma of the night left John permanently scarred. He quit his job immediately, never returning to that part of the forest. The records confirm the identities of the spirits in the house, 1 woman and 2 young girls. But there is a glaring logical gap in the evidence that the haunting alone cannot explain. The dispatch call was placed by a person with a deep male voice, yet the only spirits bound to that house are the mother and her daughters. The gender mismatch in the data points to a different source for the call. While the victims are trapped inside the house, the deep male voice on the phone suggests the murderer himself summoned John to the property.